Hello, hello. So, we got a quick, pretty fun little video today. We're just going to talk about the unban list we just got. Everyone knows by now, probably, that we just got a ban and errata list this past Tuesday, but coming with that, we also got an unban list because Sweeping Daggers got banned. And Sweeping Daggers was pretty much single-handedly keeping a number of cards from seeing play because they were just too devastating to have copied on your opponent's 4/3 attack. There are other reasons that cards don't see play, right? Some cards are, they have 2 checks or they're hard, high difficulty or whatever. But in a lot of cases, at the end of the day, any interest people had in playing a lot of cards kind of just died the moment they realized that their opponent might just Sweeping Dagger it, and that was kind of the end of that. So I figured it'd be fun to talk about some of the dozens of cards that have recently been de facto unbanned, and just highlight like 15 of the better ones or the spicier ones, just in case people forgot, because, some of these cards were written off 5 seconds after they were previewed, for instance, and we could all use a little reminder of what's out there and what you might be able to consider playing with going forward. Some level of ascending order of interest, maybe, give or take, but let's just jump into it. So first one I have here is Too Big to Contain. I think this has seen like a little bit of play in some Smiling Titan type decks, but all in all, this is a tough one to swallow. Your 7/4 just getting copied by a Sweeping Daggers and you lose your best foundation for basically free to your opponent. This was not something you would just slam into any old deck. This would be part of some kind of a 4-check package using the death symbol and whatever other symbols your character has, but this is one of the better ones, one of the better, 7/4 shaped attacks. It has a decent stat line, and the, pick and destroy already rival foundation is very, very good. So, any sort of 4-check list running things like these, we used to have like 4-check Rhiners and 4-check Peaks and things like that running around. Those are a little more viable now because they can run cards like this and some of the others that we'll talk about later. Next up, Colossus Thermoblast. I felt like I'd be remiss not to put this one on here. It is probably still kind of memey, but you can now, if you want, go back to playing, your Annie decks that made this thing a throw, or your Mothra decks that made this thing 20 speed, or your Kali decks that made this thing deal damage even on partial block. If you pull it off, you still probably win the game, just the same way as always, but all the same reasons it never really was competitively dominant before are probably still true now. Nonetheless, a card that definitely absolutely disappeared the moment Sweeping Daggers showed up, and it's going to be around a little bit here and there again, I'm sure. Next up, we have a pair of cards, and these have seen a little bit of actual play, but Colossus Swat and Lightning Rod, pretty much for the same reasons. They, play an attack and get 2 free builds for the rest of the turn is very compelling, and it is very unfortunate when your opponent gets that on their 4/3, filler utility attack, right? So, again, we've seen these a little bit in some lists, but by and large, a lot of people who thought about playing these just decided it wasn't really worth it to take the risk of getting it, thrown back in your face by Sweeping Daggers. And these are both cool cards that can do very powerful things, very interesting things in a format that still has Unyielding Destruction in particular. Reminder that these cards exist and that you can play them, and, a lot of 2-checks like Lightning Rod, there's going to be a number of 2-checks on this list that were hurt by Sweeping Daggers a lot, and a lot that were left off this list, and it might be worth going back and taking a look at that 2-check card pool again. Got another pair of cards with similar abilities. Unexpected Outcomes. This is another high diff versus 2-check comparison. Unexpected Outcomes was one of the craziest things that the old Smiling Titan decks could do before she got errata'd, and then you didn't see too many people trying to play it in lists. You saw it was like 2X's here and there for a little bit, and then Sweeping Dagger showed up, it was gone, right? Just straight gone. It is still as good as ever if you can figure out how to pass this check. Like a lot of these high difficulty cards, it is an absolutely devastating ability, and Farewell Between Friends has always been fantastic and has very much been under the thumb of Sweeping Daggers for a little while. This one, because of the order symbol and the 2-check, and particularly Heaven or Hell, I'm pretty high on from Guilty Gear, might still be tough to play because you want to play that 3 difficulty foundation if you are on one of those symbols, but nonetheless, if you're splashing order, you're tuning it, or you have good card selection on your character, whatever, you don't need Heaven or Hell, then Farewell Between Friends is just a really, really good card. not only offensively as getting to, you know, basically try-grab your opponent on your first move, but also defensively, you can name an attack that's in your hand that they don't want you to get hit with. Sorry, you don't want your opponent hitting you with, rather. And then they can't play it, and then you can build pass and be much safer on defense. You take that walk the dog out of their hand or something like that, right? So these are both also very good ones that we might see. Good wall break cards in particular if you're worried about being able to fight, you know, a Rodan or a Deku or something, then, you know, having these to make them deal with can be very good. Next up, Spirit Gun Mega. Another one this one I think showed up in some Nick Reagan stuff, but generally speaking has always been kind of on the fringes of the meta. When people play it, they're very happy with it, but they don't always run it because of the 2-check and the 6-diff and all of that. But if you're mindful of Sweeping Daggers, you're certainly not running this because you do not want your opponent to get this on their 4-3. Sweeping Daggers now gone. We can consider running this one again. It has some interesting symbols, all good and life, which, you know, 2 of those were not in the Attack on Titan set, so they've been a little out for a little while, but, you know, seeing some of those symbols come back with Turtles and some different symbols coming in Guilty Gear, and probably some different symbols still coming in King of Fighters, right? So this one is back on the radar and back on the menu of something you can play if you want a really powerful 6-2 with a sweet block that can, you know, really smooth over your deck for you. You know, Titan Cliff also being banned. This is sort of that kind of effect where you can play an attack that fixes your attack turn for the rest of the way while carrying some good stats. So Spirit Gun Mega, definitely back on the table. Next up, Ravages of War. This is another one in those, you know, 4-check deck suites. Very, very powerful card. Was kind of one of the premier reasons to run a 4-check deck was to be able to slam people with Ravages of War a bunch. You know, not only because of that blitz, but the on response is not nothing either. But, you know, once again, Sweeping Daggers copying this thing was just way too much, and it kind of went away. Ravages is back, along with Too Big to Contain, along with other cards that have come out and been immediately discarded. So we're probably going to see some people trying to do some 4-check decks going forward once again. You know, granted, Unyielding Destruction is still kind of hating on those, but, you know, you might be able to power through those depending on what your character is and that kind of thing, right? So, next up, we have a couple of 5-diffs that give themselves a bunch of stats. Holding all the cards is not the fanciest one in the world, but if you're a 7-hander, this is a 7/7 lead. Or, you know, if you're doing some things that might get you some extra stuff, you know, some extra cards in the middle of the turn, maybe you can even make this an 8-hired or something. It's not, you know, the most potent quest to ever be going on, but it is a good solid, like, 2x lead attack. And definitely one of those cards that was previewed, and then people looked at Sweeping Daggers and said, like, nope. But this one is one you can consider playing. It has no keywords, which is a little unfortunate, but could still find some synergies here and there. You know, particularly, Splinter relies on cards like this to be able to operate and do what he wants to do. So the sort of stock Splinter doing things you imagine Splinter doing is something that you're actually allowed to do now in a way that your Daggers made very difficult. Similarly, much more high profile, much stronger card in general, Patchwork Baby. I have first-hand experience with this. I thought I would be okay to play Patchwork Baby in the first Sweeping Daggers event. I was wrong. I had those things copied left and right, and they kept blowing me out. But yeah, now you can play it again. Base rate on this, you have a 5/5 stun 2 EX3 powerful 3 when all of this is said and done. And that's just, you know, if you get nothing else going on for it, that is still a very good base rate. If you pour a little momentum into it, you're going to get a little bit of extra damage. If you have an attack previous to it that has a bunch of keywords, you can get a lot of extra damage. You know, has the tech keyword, has some synergies there, has a nice one mid-block. Lots and lots going for this card. I would expect this to show up a lot. Just all of a sudden out of nowhere. You get ready to see some Patchwork Babies for sure. Next up, True 100% Unleashed. This is another one in the bucket of some people ran this anyway and just hoped not to run into the Sweeping Daggers because it's just that good. Ghidorah has kind of disappeared because of the Unyielding Destruction, but even non-Ghidorah decks, you can run this as a late-game scaling attack that can, you know, really beat up your opponent. You know, so long as, you know, the game has gotten to that point, you can pass your 6-diff, give it a bunch of speed, give it a bunch of damage, and make your opponent deal with it, even if they block it, right? The act of having to expend whatever resources on this can still exhaust them enough to kill them with other things, right? So, very powerful card, very much, you know, went out to pasture when Sweeping Daggers showed up, because again, this is another effect you don't really want your opponent getting on a 4-diff. But back now, get ready to see it again. We've seen between this and Patchwork Babies, the all and evil symbol are getting a lot here. never mind some of the other cards that might have come up. So be on the lookout for what you might be able to do with those kinds of decks now. Next, I think we're going to get into some really high difficulty stuff now. Yeah, Colossal Detonation. So this card was very popular in the Mimic decks before Mimic got errata to make that at least a little less good. But it's still every bit as strong as it was. It still says, hey, you get to go first now. You just have to find a way to pass this check. And, there's at least one obvious answer for how to do that now, and that is Zeke Warchief can try to run this card. I think some people messed around with it a little bit early on, but ultimately, the Sweeping Daggers factor makes it definitely a non-starter. Decks could consider running this card again as, another way to get out of a late game, I'm walled out kind of situation, or if your character allows for it, you can play this and try to find a way to attack a little bit on no foundations and get some free shots in, or maybe even kill your opponent, depending on what's going on. Yeah, very potent card. Difficult to answer. You have to be able to, seal the attack directly pretty much, or stop it from resolving by, flipping it on block with like a disabling jab or something like that. A tricky card to deal with if people can find a way to do it. I would imagine we'll see some people trying to find a way to do it a little bit more often going forward. Next up, Colossal Confrontation. This is one of the big ones where it was previewed, people got excited for 15 minutes, and then they thought about Sweeping Daggers, and then it was gone. I have seen people try to run this anywhere. They'll put 4 in their sideboard and 0 main, and then they'll run it when they don't face Sweeping Daggers. Yeah, this just tutors your deck for a card, and that's quite good. It refunds one of its difficulty for what it's worth. Randomly has Breaker. This thing has a shift side. I don't remember what the shift side does off the top of my head. Probably something pretty good, but this is a card that people are probably going to be very excited to try and build decks around again. Once again, part of a 4-check package you could do, a Death Order Peak or something like that, or a 4-check Irwin Smith even, maybe, question mark? This could give him the stats to get up and over, but yeah, this one's gonna show up again a little bit for sure. The last one for our currently existing attacks, the Rumbling. This one was immediately ignored 5 seconds after it was previewed because of Sweeping Daggers. Crazy, crazy, crazy ability. Your rival has to discard 3 cards unless they want to borderline forfeit the game or something. I'm not sure how many instances sacrificing all of your foundations is a viable thing that you can do. So this is kind of just a 6 mid-10 stun 3 that gives you the Ore Strike Deadlock, if you can pull it off. They do have that choice, I guess, if they're a Rodon or something and they just need their character to block with. But yeah, 11 difficulty and definitely earns it. You're gonna see some people try to make this work. I don't know if it can or not. 11 is a lot, but the payoff is also a lot. This is now a valid thing that people are gonna try to figure out if they can do this or not. And we will have to see, so be ready for this thing to possibly just show up on you. It is at least Death Symbol attuned and not Infinity or anything like that, so it can't just be any old deck. In particular, it can't go into Warchief, which we should probably be happy about, but yeah, very, very potent payoff card. And last, we're going to just touch on something from the next set, from the Guilty Gear set, Tyrant Rave. This was immediately dead to Sweeping Daggers, and now Sweeping Daggers is dead and Tyrant Rave is alive, so all the stuff you were thinking of maybe doing with this card is back on the table. This card can do some pretty cool things. Like many of the cards on this list, the challenge is how are you going to pass the check, but if you can figure that out, you can do some really spicy stuff. Thinking about it offhand, man, Shishi Wakamaru can just play this, right? That's pretty spicy. That just crossed my mind live here. He's another one. Warchief's a big, big winner from the Sweeping Daggers ban. This is another one that he could try to angle towards. Yeah, so Tyrant Rave, Soul Bad Guy decks in general that wanted to build around this card the way it's sort of designed to work, can all get excited now about being able to do this and not having to worry about your opponent lamowing you and playing it for 3 difficulty less. And yeah, that's it. That's my list of 15 cards that have been freshly unbanned. My initial list had probably like 15 more, and then I pared it down to a reasonable number. But there's lots of stuff to find, so when you have some time, give UVS Ultra a thumb through and try to look for cards that you may have forgotten about because Sweeping Daggers just made them have no point. But that's all for today. Have a good night and take care.